Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to a fresh new episode of The Lager Line, brought to you by Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. As always, I'm your host, Ben DuBose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the Houston Rockets in Houston, Texas. We're chatting today in early September, which is a quiet time in NBA circles. A lot of people in and around the league are going on vacations, including myself this past week. Apologies for my brief absence. But consider it is the last time for about 7 months that there's going to be an extended break from Rockets basketball. The good news, now I'm back. And well, we should note that there is one place where NBA level basketball is currently going on, and that's in Europe at the 2022 European Basketball Championship, which of course is best known as EuroBasket. So to talk about what's going on there, and most importantly, how the two young Houston Rockets are faring, that's Alperen Sengun for Turkey and Usman Garuba for Spain. I'm joined by perhaps the most knowledgeable Houston Rockets supporter and content creator in Europe, and that's my friend Paulo Alves out of Portugal. Paulo, welcome to the podcast. How are you, my friend?
What's up, guys? Ben's been way too kind with this praise. I'm excited to be here. It's an honor to make it on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to finally get you on my show. Of course, I've enjoyed doing yours, but I think we've got a special thing going with the Lager Line. Thanks again to our sponsors, Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. And for those who don't know Paulo already, you should follow him on Twitter at Paulo Alves NBA. But beyond that, he also does his share of writing, podcasting, even Redditing, basically all sorts of Rockets content creation. And I brought you in here in part because of your European expertise. And before we go into how Sengun and Garuba are playing, we should note that both Turkey and Spain, they're now through group stage play. Turkey 3-2, Spain 4-1. Both are advancing to the knockout round, which begins this weekend. So it's largely been a successful run for both of those guys and their teams to this point. I note the team success because we want to point out, of course, that they are putting up numbers in a winning environment as well. So it's not like these raw numbers, when we get to them, are empty. But before we even get into the minutia of where they're playing well, where there's need for improvement, I want to talk about the overall level of competition, because I'm sure there are some people that are going to listen to these gaudy Alperen Sengun numbers and say, look, a year and a half ago, he was MVP of the Turkish league, and then he came in and was basically a marginal NBA rotation player as a rookie. And that's not meant to be an insult, because he was 18 years old. To be a capable rotation player in the NBA at 18 is remarkable, quite frankly, and it speaks well to why Sengun was a first-round pick and the bright future he has. Now going into year two, he's going to be a starting center for the Rockets. Yet there clearly was a talent gap. Now, certainly, EuroBasket is above the Turkish league. Let's be clear. Hoops Hype has a global rating of the best performing players in the tournament, and Sengun is fifth. To put in perspective, the top three, Luka, Giannis, Nikola Jokic. Just incredible company that Sengun is in at the moment. So this is not the Turkish league. This is better competition than that. These are the top teams across Europe, yet it's also not the NBA. So I guess in terms of a sliding scale, where do you see the overall level of competition at EuroBasket, and basically how projectable is the projection that we're seeing from Sengun heading into this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think it's definitely above the Turkish league, and I think a really important factor that sometimes goes overlooked is the fact that these guys are playing for their country, and that's a really big, proud moment for these players. They have all of their families back at home watching them play every single time, and they have their countries behind them expecting them to do well. We've seen when Sengun did not so well, his coach himself said that he was facing some backlash from back at home country because he wasn't doing so well. And so from that perspective, I would say this is above any other league besides the NBA. That's where I would go, where I would put it, just because of the stakes, just because of how much these players value representing their countries. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't. And there's plenty of players around the NBA that choose not to represent their countries, but those that do are really proud about it. And when it comes to the level of competition, I would say that it's definitely projectable, but we've also got to realize that it's a different game. It's definitely a slower game. The athletes are not as good, and so there's more emphasis in ball movement. There's more emphasis in team play, unless you're one of those teams that has a Nikola Jokic, right? And in that sense, you're gonna be running your offense through him. But it's a lot less reliant on athleticism, I would say, and so I think that fits well with Sengun, for example, who's not the prototypical athletic guy, but he is able to keep up with people on the perimeter more, doesn't get blown by as much. But at the same time, there's guys that are really strong, right, and really big without being athletic to NBA standpoint, to NBA standards, because you're not expected to be really shifty, but you're expected to be strong and hold your own in the post, for example. And so it's a different type of challenge to what you see in the NBA, where Sengun's on the upper tier of strength when it comes to NBA players, because guys are worried about, being quick and moving a lot. In EuroLeague competition, there's a lot of those, bulky guys are going to hold it on the post. As a post player for Sengun, that's definitely an interesting challenge.
We should note, by the way, that while he hasn't played Jokic at EuroBasket, he actually did match up with Nikola in a World Cup qualifier, basically the same window, if you will, international window, to borrow a soccer/football term. And he really held his own in late August. I think had basically 20 points, 10 boards, looked really strong in that game. But as far as EuroBasket in particular, I think what was really impressive, the one disappointing loss for Turkey was the third game. And we heard after that, I believe he skipped practice on the Monday after. His coach mentioned that he had trouble sleeping because of the criticism back home that you mentioned. And then they came back and beat Belgium by 15. And we should point out that that's the Belgium team that in their previous game had defeated Spain, the number 2 team in the world, by 10. So it was a really impressive performance by Turkey, and Sengun was the best player that game against Belgium. He had 24 points on 9 of 17 shooting, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. They were plus 27 in his 32 minutes, which was best of any player on the floor. Now, Turkey did lose today, that's Wednesday, to Spain, but it was by 3 points. And again, there's no shame in that. Spain is the number 2 team in the world and really the most talent outside of the United States. So even in defeat, that's a pretty solid performance. Overall, Sengun's numbers in 5 games at EuroBasket, averaging 18.2 points per game on better than 63% shooting, 8.8 boards, 2.6 assists in 30.8 minutes. So very impressive stat line numbers, or top line statistics, I should say. He's also done a decent job of staying out of foul trouble, 3.2 in over 30 minutes per game. He did foul out against Spain, although it wasn't all being too aggressive defensively. The one that got him thrown out was actually an offensive foul that was a little touch and go, but by and large, he's done a good job of not being overly aggressive. One of the big questions going into this upcoming season with the Rockets, of course, is whether he can actually stay on the floor. And while he's only had one game with less than 3 fouls, he's only had one game, that being the one against Spain, that he fouled out as well. So he's done a good job of at least keeping it in check and being able to stay out there 30 plus minutes, which is a good sign. One thing that I really wanted to ask you about, you mentioned going into, I believe, these last 2 games that you wanted to see, and we're seeing him do more things from the mid-range, specifically where he starts in the post and then ends up perhaps, it's the one-legged Dirk or KD type shot, but basically expanding from the post and doing stuff in that 16 to 18 foot range, specifically at the elbow. And you mentioned that might be even more important for him going forward than his 3-point shot. And we know why a lot of people are focused on the 3-point shot. It's a day and age in the NBA where everybody wants to be able to play 5 out. And early last season, I want to say about the first third of his rookie year with the Rockets, he shot I believe like low to mid 30s percentage-wise from three, and then really cratered for the last 2/3 of the season. And people want him, of course, to get back to being at least a respectable three-point shooter, so that you have to respect him, defenders, that is, the space that he occupies on the floor. But you were making a pretty compelling case that actually, if he can expand from the post into becoming a solid mid-range player, and that's clearly what he's trying to do in this tournament. You look at his last 4 games, by the way, he's looking at his three-point attempts. He didn't take any against Bulgaria. In the next 3 games, 0 of 1, 1 of 2, and then didn't take any against Spain as well. So it's not like he's missing them. He's just succeeding without even really having to take the threes. And I think that sort of goes into what you were wanting to see from him more potentially with the Rockets. So explain sort of what you mean by that, and what unlocking the mid-range can functionally do for a Rockets offense, even if he's not able to be like a true 5-out spacing 5.
Yeah, I think with Sengun, it's a little bit more about optimizing the archetype that it fits into. If you're looking for a guy that's going to play defense, protect the rim, and depending on who you're after, switch onto the perimeter, and then on the offensive end be, more of an off-ball guy, regardless of if Sengun gets a three-point shot or not, he's likely not the guy that you're going to go after, right? He's not the guy you're going to start if that's what you're looking for. However, if you're looking for an offensive hub, which is what Sengun fits into, then you are going to go for a guy like Sengun, and there isn't many guys who project to be better than what he is if you're looking for that type of player. And so to me, the case becomes, let's maximize what you can do as that type of offensive hub, because if you're not going to be that, you're likely not going to be of much use to the team anyways. It's kind of not trying to fit a correct me if I make a mistake on the saying, but trying to fit a round peg into a squared hole.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
right.
yeah,
There
and
you go.
so the mid-range shot comes into play there. We've seen him in the NBA struggle against guys that are a lot bigger than him with length. We've seen him struggle against Mitchell Robinson, who's a guy that has a good combination of the length and that strength to hold the zone in the post. And just the little baby hook that he has, and just backing people under the basket, and then his series of pump fakes eventually getting a layup, that's not going to cut it against a lot of guys defending him in the NBA. And as teams prepare and scout him out, they'll know how to play defense around that. And so that mid-range shot is very much like for a guard, the ability to pull up is a pick your poison type of shot. For Sengun, I think the mid-range shot would actually, out of the post in specific, would be that pick and poison type of shot, because, well, if you're playing him further back, trying to brace for the impact of him backing down into you, then you're going to give him space to just turn around, fade away, and shoot that mid-range jump shot. Be it the Dirk fadeaway, the one-legged fadeaway, or just, we've seen them sometimes even do a legit fadeaway, the type of fadeaways that you see, I don't know, out of the top of my head, the Mar DeRozan take. And as an offensive hub, being able to be a dynamic scorer that can have counters to multiple types of defending is really important, especially when you consider that he's a very good passer, right? And so if you put that together, you're looking at a guy that could become a star, right? Because he's never really going to be viable as a guy off the ball. You're going to need to use him on the ball a bunch for him to be anything in the NBA, I would say. And although a three-point shot is good, make no mistake about it, it does provide you offensive flexibility. You're not really expecting him to be pulling up or to be using his three-point shot as a threat to then blow by guys or stuff like that, right? And so the three-point shot comes more for the off-ball ability that he would, or the off-ball dimension that he would get out of the three-point shot. But then again, if you're playing him off the ball, most of the time you'd rather have another guy on the floor instead of him. And
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more thing about the three-point shot. I don't know how much his willingness to shoot it with Turkey is himself or the coaching staff. One of the things that's really common in these EuroBasket environments and these European national teams is that these coaches are usually very long tenured. And there's a structure around the team that's been there for a long time, because basketball is a big sport, but it's not, as big of a deal as it is in the USA. And so there's a lot of value put on seniority on these teams. Sengun, even though he's clearly the best player on the team every single time, unless he's having an off day, doesn't get treated as such. And so there's a possibility that the coach doesn't want him to be taking 3-point shots, right? There's also a possibility, and I think it's rather likely, that his usage between games changes so much because of exactly that. He plays with two other NBA players in Furkan Korkmaz and Shady Osman. And there's a pseudo or ex-NBA player in Shane Larkin there as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those guys have been there before him and have contributed to the national team for a longer time. And so while watching him, we often find ourselves frustrated with the fact that he's not being used as a shot creator when he's clearly, by far and away, the best shot creators that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll go big stretches of time without being fed in the post. You can see him asking for the ball, but either the entry pass is not good because there's no true guard with the ability to do it, or they just completely ignore him, and you see Korkmaz and Shady Osman all of a sudden play like James Harden and take step back threes. It's
right.
Seniority is a big factor. It's another thing that you should take into consideration when you look at how these guys are doing over in their national teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I should throw a shout out to our friends over at Rockets Watch. Just go to @RocketsWatch on Twitter, and they've got live streams for basically every Sengun and Garuba game. It's a really cool initiative set up by Dave Hardesty of Clutch Fans, Jackson Gatlin of Locked On Rockets, Roosh Williams, who does a podcast with the Ball of His Life Network. He's also doing State of the Rockets with Jackson Gatlin. So they've got a really good thing going on. And if you haven't checked out these games, just go to Rockets Watch on Twitter, and you can find the links. I believe they next play again starting the 10th, which is Saturday, although I haven't checked the schedules for Turkey and Spain just yet. I know the 10th is when the knockout stage starts. As far as the element of three-point shooting or the lack thereof with Sengun's game and how that translates to the Rockets, when you were making that point, a quote that I kept going back to in my mind was when Stephen Silas talked to Adam Spillane at Summer League, and he was talking about potentially either having Eric Gordon or Jae'Sean Tate as the fifth starter. And a lot of people sort of presumed it would be Eric Gordon because after the Rockets ended up unexpectedly with Jabari Smith Jr. instead of Paolo Banchero, there was a lot of talk about how Sengun might be a big beneficiary because clearly the one area that Jabari should be, at least from day one, and upgrade relative to Banchero is as a three-point shooter, as a floor spacer. And so that could perhaps offset the fact that at this point in his career, Sengun really isn't one. And so if you think about, okay, Sengun isn't really a three-point shooter, then perhaps you need in today's 5-out NBA to really space the floor around him. And of course, Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green can shoot. We talked about Jabari Smith Jr. And then perhaps that leads to a strong case for Eric Gordon. But Stephen Silas actually went out of his way. It wasn't even that Adam Spillane asked him about this. Silas went out of his way to bring up the fact that they really like Sengun and Tate together because when that happens, the five is not going to be able to switch on to Tate and just drop back the way we've seen so many times the last two seasons and just clog the offense to where it's just not functional. And I went back and looked at the numbers last season to see what Tate's ratings were with Sengun and without, and there actually was a slight bump in Tate's offensive efficiency when he was on the floor with Sengun. So there could be something to that. However, I'm sure there's other people that are just thinking about the spacing. I saw Nathan Fogg point out on Twitter a month or so ago that the spacing was just going to be a disaster if they started Tate. And of course, we know that Sengun is going to be the starter at center now that there's no Christian Wood. So I guess in terms of just how this functionally translates to the Rockets, do you believe that this model of Sengun as a hub of sorts can work with a second non-shooter like a Jae'Sean Tate, or we can also throw Atari Eason or Usman Garuba in the mix, hypothetically? Can you still work with another one of those guys in your five, or do you really need an Eric Gordon or Garrison Matthews, someone like that, to space the floor around him?
I think it can work in stretches. I don't think it should be a mainstay in your offense. And I think even improving his mid-range shooting in self-creation circumstances would also help his ability to play with one non-floor spacer, that be Jason Tate or Tyrese or whoever it is, because it doesn't help as much as getting a three-point shot, of course, but your ability to score further away from the basket allows more opportunities for guys to cut without the lane being crowded. And one of the things that Sengun did very well, and why I suspect that he did well in the stats that you checked with Jason Tate, is very much the fact that Jason Tate is a very active cutter. He will be moving around.
Right.
He'll find opportunities, and he's a crafty finisher at the rim as well. I know he always goes left, but he's very reliable at it, right? And so that's why it's a good combo. But to your point, and just to kind of throw my thought in there, maybe it should be neither. Maybe it should be KJ Martin, who's the intermediate option between the two, who can shoot not as well as Gordon, but can cut way better than what Eric Gordon can, right? And be a loft threat as well. And what that allows you to do is to play both Gordon and Jason Tate in the second unit, and have Eric Gordon to some extent maybe offset a little bit of the troubles that Jason Tate has spacing the floor.
That's a good point. And you also have Tate as a ball handler of sorts, which could potentially help you out since you don't really have a proven backup point guard, be it Daishen Nix or Ty Washington, whoever ends up winning that battle out of camp. They're going to be relatively inexperienced. So yeah, if you can potentially get Tate into that second unit, then his skills as a ball handler and a quasi facilitator, that can potentially mitigate one of your other weaknesses as well. That's pretty interesting. I hadn't considered that. I want to ask you about the defensive side of the floor as well, because of course the big question with Sengun is, quite frankly, whether he can stay on the floor. And that was a big question for him early in his rookie season. He actually got a little bit better at it as the year progressed. And he didn't, it certainly didn't become a non-story, but it's not like it was a linear progression in terms of he got more minutes and the fouls stay at the same rate. There was a slight decline. And then in this, I mentioned leading off the podcast, he's played over 30 minutes, almost 31 minutes a game. And even with fouling out against Spain, he's still only averaging 3.2 fouls in those nearly 31 minutes. However, the flip side, as you mentioned, there's not really the speed for the most part in EuroBasket that there is in the NBA. So it's not like there's nearly the potential blow-bys on the perimeter where sometimes he just gets too handsy trying to get a steal and just picks up a cheap foul that way. So in terms of the defending, he's clearly been able to stay out there in EuroBasket, but then there's also sort of the athleticism gap relative to the NBA. How much of that translates, and how much are you still potentially worried about the fouling issue heading into, his second NBA season?
Yeah, I think one of the theories that I had back last season was that he seemed to foul a lot when he knew he wasn't going to get back into the game, and that his role was very much capped by Christian Wood being the starting center, and his non-ability, I would say, to play anything other than the five. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because in EuroBasket, you foul out at 5 instead of 6, like in the NBA.
Now, and it is a shorter game, 40 minutes instead of 48, still.
That's also correct. But I would say from his games with Turkey, the defense has definitely not been encouraging. Even against this the lower level of competition, defense hasn't been great. He's still been that guy that fights for the boards and everything like that. But defensively, and be it because he's at the wrong spot, or because he's not reacting quick enough, or because he's just getting beat sometimes, speed-wise, even by EuroBasket players, it's been a rough watch at times. And that's partially why sometimes he gets pulled for Sunley, who is the backup, or depending on who he decides to watch, to start center in Turkey. So it might be, and I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but it might actually also be the fact that in international play, defense is a lot about communication, and defense is a lot about chemistry, and a lot about working as a unit. And when you're in these settings with the national team, these guys have been together for a shorter time compared to the NBA, right? And so it's expected for there to be more miscommunication. It's expected for guys not to be in the right spots. And his team itself is not guys that are known for their defense. Furkan Korkmaz, at least in the NBA, is very much known as he's a pure shooter. Same thing with Zedi Osman, right? And then Shane Larkin is an undersized point guard, and whoever they play in the other slot is usually a shooter as well. And so it's hard to judge defense because of all of these factors, but the raw eye test, just watching the games, it hasn't looked great. And that's putting it mildly, I would say.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, with how young he is and just the overall transition, step one for me, the reason I'm focusing on the fouling is just staying on the floor, period. And then from there, we can get into how to best optimize him in terms of how much he switches versus drops, and schematically how you deploy him, who you put as basically the complementary players around him. I think potentially Jabari and his range could help a lot. That could be a really nice pairing to sort of mitigate those deficiencies. But yeah, he's clearly got a ways to go on that end, and that's why I focus on the fouling issues so much, because step one is just staying out there. And then if he's out there, then that gives Steven Silas and the coaching staff much more of a chance to sort of experiment and see how you can, improve some of those deficiencies and or mitigate them through how you use the other pieces with the Rockets over this coming season. I guess to wrap up the Sengun discussion, Paolo, just overall, clearly offensively, he's done really well as basically the hub for Turkey. Defensively, there's been those issues, which largely were to be expected. Just overall, are you in line with where you thought Sengun would be a month ago? Just basically now that we've seen Sengun in 5 EuroBasket games, we've seen the World Cup qualifiers, including the one against Jokic. We saw a couple of friendlies getting ready at the start of this international window. Just basically expectations-wise, relative to a month ago and what he's able to handle in this upcoming season, where is he relative to where I guess he was, A, at the end of his rookie season, and B, where you expected him to be as we went into this summer?
I think I am higher on him than I was to end the season, because in one off season he's shown flashes of that mid-range shot, which to me is a big upgrade. And as time went on in EuroLeague, he seems to be hesitating a little bit less in shooting the three-point shot, which is already progress, right? And with these young guys, you can't always expect progress to be linear. And to see that Sengun so far kind of has been is a good thing. And what speaks volumes about that is, as time went on in the Turkish team, he wasn't the starter to begin the games this summer, and then he's progressively gotten to start most of the games now, and he's been used more, and he's gotten the chance to go off for 20, 21, 24 points in 3 of the last 5 games, and that speaks for itself. And it also is important to know that with that inconsistent role, he's managed to, for the most part, still strive. And that's another thing that we kind of saw last season, where his role within the team would vary a lot from game to game with the Rockets. It's also been the case with Turkey, and he's done well. I expect him with the Rockets next season, with Steven Silas having had an entire offseason to plan and think about how to insert such a unique player that he wasn't expecting to get last season, or to be as NBA ready as he was. I expect him to be even better than what he's been this summer, and I think it will be really exciting, because the Rockets are in, as we all know, in a situation where there's this season, there's an off season, and then we're going to try and compete. And so this season will be really important for him to prove that he can be a key core piece in the year after this. And depending on how good he is, it might mold or define some of the moves that Rockets decide to make with the 70 million in cap space that they're projected to have next season.
Yeah, absolutely. Overall, I think I'm right there with you. The defensive deficiencies are there. I sort of expected those going in. But in terms of, I guess, just overall, the ways you would evaluate a prospect, his technique appears to be better. His footwork is as good as ever, in my opinion. Actually, he's had a few moves that we didn't see during his rookie season. Now, some of that is just sample size. He does seem to be getting progressively stronger. That's sort of weird to say, because he came into the league so much stronger than most rookies, because clearly he was a professional player overseas. And of course, he's just more of an old school big to begin with in terms of his overall body type and presence. But when you look at that World Cup qualifier against Jokic, I thought he held his own physically a bit more than he did against Jokic a year ago in those matchups between the Rockets and the Nuggets. So we've seen the progression in a few areas, technique, strength, but above all else, he really, as you mentioned, seems to have a good attitude. And I think that's sort of the secret sauce as it comes to his development and what you can expect going forward. And I think now that he's going to have a consistent role, then yeah, that's the case for optimism, is that this stuff can really take off now that he's going to be in a role that he can really get used to, as opposed to, his first rookie season. He knew he was going to get maxed out at 15 to 20 minutes, and sometimes he just went all out because, quite frankly, there wasn't much point to not doing that because he wasn't going to finish the game no matter what he did. So you might as well go for the home run plays. And sometimes those lead to silly turnovers or fouls. By the way, I should mention he's done a pretty good job overall of limiting turnovers. Against Spain, he had 3. The rest of the tournament, he's had 2, 0, 1, 2. So despite all the crazy passes, we know he likes to try, and Turkey uses him at least more than the Rockets in terms of overall minutes as an offensive hub. He's done it really without getting into much turnover trouble. So that's a good sign as well. Anyway, as we wind down this podcast with Paulo Alves talking about EuroBasket, we spent most of the podcast talking about Alperen Sengun because clearly he's playing a marquee role for Team Turkey. But I do want to talk about Usman Garuba a little bit, who has a slightly lesser role on Team Spain, 4-1. Spain actually did defeat Garuba, and Spain defeated Sengun in Turkey today, 72-69. So Spain is now 4-1, which you'd largely expect as the number 2 team in the world by FIBA's world rankings. In those 5 games, Garuba averaging 4.4 points, 69% shooting. That's pretty nice. 4.8 rebounds in just 16 minutes. But again, that's to be expected because Spain has a very deep and accomplished roster. The bottom line for Garuba, just seeing him on the court, is a positive step in his development because he missed most of his rookie season with injuries and also Summer League last month. So the sample is way smaller, but what generally have you seen from Garuba in terms of how he's played for Spain, how he's being used, and how much does it translate this season to the NBA level, or is this a case that he still needs more time at the G League to work on some of his weaknesses?
It's tough because even with Spain, sometimes NBA guys like Korkmaz and Cedi Osman go to their own countries, and in that team they're the guy, right? And so their roles get maximized a lot. I think Garuba is the complete opposite. He plays the same role for Spain that he would play for the Rockets. He's an energy big off the bench. He's not featured in the offense. His playing time is somewhat limited by the fact that the best players for Spain are the Hernan Gomez brothers, and so they play center and they need spacing. And so it's tough to, kind of like Sengun last year with Christian Wood, it's tough to play him more. But he gets played he gets his 18 minutes a night. He gets his minutes in specific circumstances where the team, if it's at the end of a quarter and the team's playing a defensive possession, they'll sub him in. He's very much a specialist in that regard. But it's tough to see much else out of him because he's out there doing cardio a lot of the time. He's out there hustling for rebounds. He's setting a lot of screens. I think Jackson Gatlin tracked a play where he set 6 or 7 screens, and it's mostly that type of role. Kind of Draymond Green-esque in a sense if you scale it down. And when it comes to translating that to the Rockets, to me, Garuba's always going to be a little bit of a project, and it's a little bit unfair to him that he had so much trouble staying on the floor last season, because even though the Rockets are rebuilding and they have a lot of time, they have a lot of time for the big, bright stars, right? These guys like Garuba who project to play a smaller role are actually a little bit of on the clock because, once again, at the end of the next season, they have a lot of cap space. And with not a lot of stars on the market, they're likely going to go acquire role players. And what's Garuba? A role player. And he's going to have a very short time to prove himself and to show, hey, there's potential here for something special that you cannot get on the market, on the free agent market this offseason. And that would be a 5 that can rebound well, that can play switch defense, and that needs to improve his 3-point shot and needs to improve his general pick and roll game. Not the screens, but the rolling to the basket part, the having better hands to catch passes, being a little bit more crafty around the rim to be able to, I don't know, sometimes pump fake, sometimes go for reverse layups and stuff like that. And he's very raw. And he might be one of those guys that gets squeezed out of the rotation because he plays a position we're really deep at with Tyrese and Sengun, Jabari Smith, KJ Martin, even Jashante to some extent, right? He might
The
get
50
squeezed
million
out.
backup centers they brought in.
Exactly. And he might just end up getting squeezed back to the G League, maybe. And it's really unfortunate that I'm this negative about Garuba because it's the truth. If he doesn't get a chance this season, it is unlikely that he'll get a chance moving forward until the Rockets eventually pay their young guys and are now, instead of looking for the best role players available, they're now considering the best role player versus the contract that he has. And that's where Garuba might get a chance again if he doesn't show out this season. And he might, right? He might. But it's tough because Rockets are in a very unique position of we have time, but not that much time.
True. The timetable is sort of set, as we talked about before, with not only the cap space coming into play next offseason, but then the pick obligations to Oklahoma City. They're going to be trying to win less than a year from now, and so they're going to have to form some sort of evaluation on a lot of these guys, and it's tough for Garuba because he hasn't really played yet, and there doesn't seem to be a clear role. And, in fairness to him, I listed his top line stats earlier. Clearly, his best value is a defender, and that's not going to show up in a lot of the box score stats. But in terms of how it projects to the Rockets, you talked about him as a backup five, and that's sort of where I see him too. But you've seen also some stuff made out this offseason about him sort of remaking his body. And he is skinnier than he was for most of his rookie year. He seems to be lighter now, a bit more nimble. I've seen a couple of people suggesting on Twitter, which I don't really agree with, but I've seen some suggestions that, maybe you should think of him as like an oversized wing, somebody that can defend on the perimeter. But for me, just looking at the skill set, and especially in EuroBasket play, it seems like at the NBA level, he's almost got to be an undersized five, that he's more in competition with, well, we mentioned all the backup centers they brought in, but then I presume Tari and Jabari are going to figure into that mix at the five as well, just because of the way the NBA is trending. To me, even if he's a little bit lighter and more agile on the perimeter, just without a consistent three-point shot at volume and not really being that shifty, he's, at least to me, he's got to be closer to a five in today's NBA to work, right?
You've got to be an outlier in Garuba's case because the position he plays, if it's the five, you can find, as the Rockets have clearly shown us this offseason, you can find a number of centers that can do some rim running, set some screens, and catch some rebounds. There's a lot of them. There's Willie Cauley-Stein, Bruno Fernando, just on the Rockets at this moment. There's Marquise Chris. There's a lot of guys that can do that. So the way Garuba sticks, especially considering how far behind he seems to be in his game, is he needs to be unique. And what's unique about him is the fact that he's very strong and he's 6'8", so he can slide to the five and not be completely outmatched when it comes to size. And so his major tool will be playing a little bit like Bam Adebayo and Robert Williams and Onyeka Okongwu, the guys that can play the five and do everything that the five does, but are also switchable onto the perimeter and allow you to play a switch everything scheme that Rockets likely won't go to with Sengun, but when Sengun's not on the floor, could be a viable option. And in closing lineups, we see it all the time that NBA teams end up playing even smaller guys than Garuba at that position, and would have hoped to have a guy like Garuba that doesn't give up as much size when they do go to those small ball lineups. And so for Garuba, that's why it's the critical thing is becoming a five, because if he becomes a four, then all of a sudden he's not shifty enough. He's way too far behind the curve as a 3-point shooter, and it's harder to stand out and to become as good as you need to be to play one of the wing positions. And so as a five, if he can develop a 3-point shot, it looked very flat to end the season, and he hasn't taken one. I think he's taken one in the last he's taken one in the last 5 games. Then those are the key factors. Let's be a little bit shiftier so you can sell yourself as a switch big. Let's get a 3-point shot so you can play with an on-shooter on the floor with you, which is a big deal, as we know in the NBA nowadays. You can never play with more than one non-floor spacer.
Absolutely. Folks, that's where we will wrap it today. Great insight from my guest, Paulo Alves. You can follow him on Twitter at Paulo Alves NBA. Paulo, I could talk to you for hours, but I'm going to wrap it here. Thank you so much for the time, and let's do this again, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun, as it always was, recording with you. I look ahead to coming again.
Yep, absolutely. We'll be glad to talk with you more as we get closer to training camp. For today, that will do it for Paulo Alves. I'm Ben DuBose. You can follow him on Twitter. As I mentioned, Paulo Alves NBA. You can follow me on Twitter at Ben DuBose. The Logger Line does not have a Twitter, but we do have a link tree, which you can find for my Twitter, and that will take you to basically all the major podcast distributors. Just search for the Logger Line, even if you can't find the link tree, and you should be able to find it on your podcast platform of choice. Also, check out sports790.com, the official website of Sports Talk 790. You can find our episodes there as well. Once again, want to thank Clutch the Lager of Karbach Brewing, our sponsors, for their continued support. And well, that will do it for today. For Paulo, I'm Ben. Thanks again for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Lager Line.